Do you see yourself still as a filmmaker, or are you still in filmmaking? So I
Yeah,
guess I guess you're thinking also in documentaries when you think about things that you process, I suppose.
yeah,
So
yeah.
what documentary, even if you might not ever gonna do it, but what documentary are you thinking about right now?
I'm always thinking about a few, but uh, like kind of there's one. There's a couple I'm working on, but one I've thought about recently is the theory of shock inductions. So I recently did a TEDx in Switzerland. In hypnosis, there's basically two ways to hypnotize people. There's probably more, but two rough styles. One style is you simply sit somebody down with their consent, and you ask them to relax, and then you show them a bunch of behavioral tricks that cause them to relax. One of them is slow breathing. You slow down their pace. Then you create imagery that might be positive. This style is called progressive relaxation, and it's the typical kind of hypnosis that you see if you went to a hypnotherapist. The other kind of hypnosis, which is not well understood, is called either snap inductions or shock inductions. And I think it's worthy of being a film because it is the way by which we are often manipulated culturally. It might be the way that you can, that people start wars essentially. And I'll explain how it's done hypnotically. So, if anyone's been to a stage hypnosis show, now it's interesting. Traveling around, I find stage hypnosis has different levels of popularity country to country. In America, it's quite big. What's interesting, in some countries, it's still illegal. In Belgium, it is illegal to do public demonstrations of hypnosis, which is hilarious. But in most European countries, you're allowed to do it. But I find just it's less popular in Europe. But so what a shock induction is basically you can, if you sit somebody down once again and you basically move them, or get them to relax a little bit in about 10 seconds by shocking them in a particular way, you can drop them into what's called a somnambulant trance, which is a very deep trance. Their eyes roll up in their head, their muscles become limp, and they appear to faint. Now, they haven't fainted because they can hear you, they can hear everything that's going on, but from the outward appearance, they sort of flop over and they look like they have fainted. So when people see this and without understanding it, they can actually become quite terrified because they think, wow, you've just knocked that person out. But it's not quite that. But the reason why I think it makes for a great film is I think that a shock induction is a little bit what the international lockdown that happened, it's happened during this COVID-19 pandemic, is a similar thing, because the formula for for creating a shock induction is simply to begin relaxing somebody in a sort of authoritative way. Don't worry, I've got you. And then to surprise them, any kind of surprise, as long as the surprise is swift and drastic. So the surprise can be a sentence like, there's a terrible epidemic and we're all in danger. Or it can be an action like, from here on in, everyone will be by law forced to stay inside. Now, in hypnosis, the reason why we do shock inductions or snap inductions, they're often seen as, if I work as a hypnotherapist, and if I had a client who is very hard to hypnotize, because some people are, and I would say to them, if you like, we can try more sort of aggressive methods. So a shock induction or a snap induction is a more aggressive method. And if they consent and they're okay with it, then you do it, and often you'll get a good result. So the reason why you do it is that the principle of a shock induction is that whatever comes after the shock. So in a stage hypnosis show, you can shock somebody, drop them into trance, and then you can tell them that they can't speak English anymore. and that person will start speaking gibberish. They will be unable to speak English. Now, not everybody, but about a third of the population will react consistently. You can also tell that person that they are a chicken. And this is always a very comic moment in a show, but I actually think it reveals a very profound aspect of human nature, because that person will likely think that they are a chicken. Now, so you imagine the propaganda possibilities. If you can shock somebody and then make a suggestion that the only way you can stay safe is by staying inside your house, that suggestion goes deep. The principle of the shock and then suggestion, the suggestion goes deep. Now, I'm not saying this to suggest that we were the victims of a mass conspiracy to control us. I think everybody was shocked by the reality of COVID. But I think that some of the reasons why people accepted things uncritically, much like if I hypnotize somebody and turned them into a chicken, and then you said to the person, "Hey, you're not a chicken," they would actually probably peck you because they're still a chicken. So similarly, when people absorb a suggestion that's given to them through a shock induction, they've taken it deep. Yes, if I don't stay inside, I'm in danger, and I'm endangering everyone else. So I think it would be the reason it needs to be known is that people need to know that these things work. They work on human nature.
There was something that came up along this, what you were saying now, that shock-induced hypnosis. I was thinking of that, and I wonder how you see it from your perspective as a hypnotherapist, that people, they are triggered, like a trauma being triggered, and then they have an overreaction. For example, I don't know, they attack someone or whatever. Could this also be like a shock-induced trance type of reaction? Because you would usually say they are not themselves in that situation.
Yes. So I would say classically, yes. I think it's a very good example. So a good example would be certain racist responses have a shock. So for example, right now, there's a number of people who are, there's a controversy every week in the United States where usually a white person overreacts to a black person walking into a store or walking in a park. And I think what's not really well understood is that I think these people are legitimately afraid, meaning they may be racist too, but part of the reason they're having this issue is that they see a black person that maybe is too close to them, a black man, and they actually are legitimately feeling fear. They think this person can hurt them, but I think it's a result of what you're describing. So if I show you a bunch of movies, it's a very interesting thing. Where a very dramatic example of this is actually the difference between Canada and the United States. So let me explain an interesting thing. Both Canada and the United States have fairly sizable African or African-derived populations, but there's a big difference. Most black people in the United States are African American. They have a history of through slavery, and most African-derived people in Canada are from the Caribbean because of the history of immigration from the Caribbean. So there are very many different things. And people have noticed that, for example, the crime rate related to, let's say, the black underclass is much lower in Canada than it is in the US, which you might explain, and I hope I'm not an expert in this area, by the history of trauma and slavery that was much stronger in the United States than it was in Canada, and that you have really two different kinds of people. You have African Americans, and then you have more like Afro-Caribbeans that are in Canada. Well, in Canada, you often have a very similar reaction where Canadians will respond to black men fearfully because they watch American television. They watch American TV shows where scary black men mug people or scary black men jump out of cars and shoot people, where scary black men do these very shocking things that work as shock inductions. Literally, a gunshot is a shock induction. If you hear a gunshot, you will pay very close attention to whatever comes next. So similarly, when you have a bunch of black men shooting guns on TV, you basically make the suggestion that black men are potentially extremely dangerous. And the absurdity is that even though statistics would suggest that, there might be a reality if you walk in rough neighborhoods in the United States, there's a chance you might get mugged, and maybe that mugger might be black. In Canada, there's no reason to think that, or no similar reason to think that. Yet many Canadians respond that way. And I think it's exactly the process that you described.
So you specifically would think it's shock-induct trance, the way you know it from hypnosis. Not just a similar thing, but exactly that.
Yes. Well, I would say again, I started off by saying that hypnosis is not something that just happens at a hypnotist's office. That trance behaviors are happening all the time, and hypnosis is just a model for understanding them. So, for example, like I often joke that spanking is a shock induction, because literally what you're trying to do when a child is spanked violently, it's a shock, and then there's a moral to the story. Behave better, stop doing what you were doing. And the reason why spanking works is the same reason why shock inductions work. The spank is the shock, and then the moral or the suggestion comes right after. And it's usually there's a story like, be a good child, don't misbehave, spank, spank, spank. I'm recreating a spanking scenario here. But similarly, in wartime, or when wars are declared, classically the war in Iraq was actually a giant shock induction. So, you see this horrible event, it scares the living daylights out of you. So Americans were scared, they saw it. I'm not trivializing any aspect of it, because we know this was a massive and terrible event by human standards. But the effect would be, after a shock induction, the next suggestion that is made becomes powerful. So whatever it is, this horrible thing that you saw, and then I say it's all Saddam Hussein's fault, or it's all Osama bin Laden's fault. At that moment, you will go, yes, it's all Osama bin Laden's fault. And so this method of, this I think even goes back to the Blitzkrieg. It works in two ways. It can work in creating adherence, meaning if I shock you and say, we got to beat up the guy down the street, and you're my friend, you are more likely to go along with me if I've shocked you first. But it also works in, if I'm trying to scare people, I shock them, and then also suggest that I possess, supernatural power. I think this is my limited understanding of the famous Blitzkriegs, by the Nazis, where that part of the idea was to start with an incredibly shocking attack, and which would cause the enemy to sort of like fold. And that is the same principle, I think, of a shock induction, because the suggestion isn't that you should fold. The suggestion is, that one thing I did to you was so overwhelming that I can now make the suggestion that I possess a power beyond your imagination, which is terrifying. Another good example of a shock induction is getting punched in the face. I don't know if you've ever been punched in the face. I have a few times.
Fortunately not, yeah.
Oh. But that is a shock induction too. It gets your attention, and the next thing that somebody says to you after they punch you in the face is something you will always remember. So it's a similar principle.
Okay, that sounds very, very interesting. And so, is there anything else that you think about, which implications it has? like shock inductions for us individually, also maybe on a societal level, on a humanity level?
Yeah, well, the reason I think it's an issue and maybe even a sort of a problem would be that so for example, there are movies I can recommend if you're interested in finding out more. I would recommend watching Now You See Me. It's a Hollywood film. It's about a group of like magicians, mentalists, and hypnotists that rob banks and become incredibly rich, and they're used to manipulate governments, and it's like a Hollywood film. But in the film, one of the actors portrays a hypnotist who is able just to walk up to people in the street and perform a shock induction. You see the people collapse in his arms. Now I can do that. I can walk up to people. I mean, you can do it. If I showed you the technique, you can do it. I can walk up to people and I can perform a shock induction and they will collapse. I have to catch them. And now they may not stay in that state for long. It's not as dangerous as it seems. When people see this, they're like, oh my God, somebody could just walk up to me, pull my hand, and then I'd fall on the ground. They could take my wallet and run away. So the truth is that it doesn't work that way, but the movies portray it as working that way, that anybody can walk up to you and just do this and you're knocked out. It's the what they're not showing you is what's happened before. So what's happened before is if I would do this to somebody, I would say, would you like to try a hypnotic experiment? Are you okay with going into hypnosis? And I've sort of suggested to them that I'm not going to hurt you in any way. I'm going to watch out for your safety. So what I've created is a kind of safe atmosphere. Then I might tell them to breathe in. Why? Because when people slow their breathing down, they're starting to move into the calmer nervous system. So I've set a kind of momentum and tension where I'm suggesting you can go to a calm place. Then I perform the shock induction, and at that point they might drop. Now, so this has implications because my question, I guess I would ask you, or I would ask your audience, is this information that belongs to humanity, or should it be sort of the private purview of hypnotists and maybe people that are interested in mind control? And my feeling is that this belongs to humanity. It's a aspect of human nature. I think it's there for a reason. It's there. I think it has to do, like the way it originates, a little bit of a hack in an evolutionary in an evolutionary behavior. The hack is that if things in the animal world move very quickly. So if you were being stalked by a tiger, the moment you have to respond is very short, meaning the tiger, you might hear a rustle and then the tiger's on you, right? So we are equipped with a very quick reorientation system. Okay, so that or any kind of attack event in nature happens very fast. Famously, snakes and other animals have been designed by evolution to strike so quickly before the animal can respond. So it's something that's out there a lot, and mammals have the ability to reorient really fast. I'm sure this has happened to you. You hear a loud bang and you jump. That's you reorienting. So what hypnotists have discovered, I didn't discover it, it's been known probably for, I would guess, a few decades, as far as I know, is that when you shock somebody and they try to reorient quickly, that if you sort of say to them, you're basically psychologically saying to them, it's okay, don't panic, just go to sleep. That because that instruction is given to their unconscious mind, not their conscious mind, they often will go straight into sleep. They will go deep into trance. So this phenomena is essentially a hack of a very natural impulse to reorient when you're shocked. But it's been used to control and manipulate people. And I think, it's used regularly to start wars, to rally people to your cause. It's just an effective method of persuasion. It reminds me of the I did a documentary on the origins of the death squad. Well, actually, sorry, it was a newspaper article, not a documentary. But my belief is that the concept of the death squad originates in Romania, with the Romanian Iron Guard, which sort of came about, was a sort of a fascist movement, came about in at the same time, or rose to prominence with the Nazis, and they actually influenced the Nazis. So one theory is that the Nazis got their idea from the Romanians. So what the Romanian Iron Guard would do is that if you had a political opponent, so if you and I were political opponents, instead of arguing with you, or let's say if the opposition became ferocious, instead of just let's say shooting you, what the Iron Guard invented was a system where they would go to their opponent's house, they would kill the person, and they would very violently mangle the corpse, or they would kill them in a terrible way. And they had a signature move, which they would leave a knife directly in the person's heart, a big dagger in the person's heart. So then when the family found them, or people arrived, they would see this horrible scene. Now, the reason why this mattered is because the Iron Guard became very successful. They were probably a bunch of crackpots, bullies, conspiracy theorists, priests, fanatics. They weren't people that should have a large movement, but they quickly gained a very large movement because they scared the shit out of everybody. And what I think it was, in effect, a shock induction, where they perform an act that is so shocking that people need to recreate another reality. The reality is probably like, I don't want to challenge these people because that could happen to me, or I'm just going to run away, which is sort of what happened. And the Nazis then developed very similar tactics. Always start with shock and make the shock so crazy. But that's basically the definition of hypnotic suggestion. ISIS did the same thing, cut off someone's head. It's so crazy and so shocking that your opponents are going to be like, I don't even want to dance. I'm not interested in engaging with you because it's so crazy. And so that principle is still at work, I think, in all those situations.